The USS Ohio has just made landfall in the Philippines, and Beijing's nerves are doing cartwheels. This isn't just any submarine. It's one of the US Navy's crown jewels, a nuclear-powered beast carrying 154 Tomahawk missiles. To put it bluntly, if Poseidon built a tank, it would look like this. At 560 feet long and 18,000 tons submerged, the Ohio doesn't just slip into the water, it owns it. And thanks to nuclear propulsion, it doesn't need to refuel, ever. It just vanishes beneath the waves for months like a lurking shark no one can track until it decides to show itself. And oh, it decided. Subic Bay in the Philippines became the perfect stage. Once the largest US naval base in Asia, Subic is back in the spotlight after years of dormancy. The Ohio showing up there wasn't a casual port call. It was the geopolitical equivalent of the US rolling back into the club in slow motion while the DJ scratches the record. Allies see reassurance. Rivals see a very expensive headache. Cue the outrage. Beijing's reaction was instant and predictable. Accusations of the US deploying offensive weapons and turning the South China Sea into a powder keg. Translation: Washington just parked a nuclear-armed heavyweight in the middle of China's self-proclaimed backyard. To China, that's like your noisy neighbor parking a monster truck on your lawn, revving the engine every time you open the blinds. But China doesn't just complain, it innovates. Behind the stern language lies a rapid military response. Enter Beijing's anti-submarine frenzy. Experimental drone subs the size of buses, sonar webs stretched across choke points, and patrol aircraft designed to sniff out intruders. Think of it as an underwater surveillance grid, mixed with Silicon Valley ambition. The Ohio is stealth incarnate, but Beijing's betting billions that technology can narrow that gap. Why the obsession? Because the South China Sea isn't just salt water and disputed rocks. It's the economic lifeline of the 21st century. Over $5.3 trillion in trade sails through every year, including energy, semiconductors, and yes, half the gadgets you're probably watching this video on. Any instability here doesn't just rattle nations, it rocks global markets. A single mishap, an accidental collision, a sonar misread, or a blockade could make oil prices jump faster than your Wi-Fi bill during streaming season. That's why the Ohio matters. It's not only a submarine, it's a floating reminder that the US intends to keep those lanes open, no matter how many artificial islands Beijing builds or how many warnings it issues. Every surfacing, every port call, every carefully timed maneuver is a chess move in a high-stakes game where the board just happens to be one of the busiest shipping routes on Earth. And here's the kicker. This isn't the first time America's undersea giants have turned quiet patrols into loud political statements. The Ohio showing up now, right after China's shiny new Fujian aircraft carrier completed sea trials, is no coincidence. It's Washington saying, "Congrats on the new toy." But we've been playing this game a lot longer, and our toys bite harder. Now let's talk about why this submarine isn't just a military flex but a carefully scripted performance. The Ohio didn't just arrive. It arrived with timing so precise it could have been choreographed by Hollywood. Days earlier, China's newest and most advanced aircraft carrier, the CNS Fujian, wrapped up its sea trials. Beijing celebrated it as a milestone, plastering headlines everywhere. Then, bam! The US parks a guided missile submarine at Subic Bay like saying, "Nice carrier. Here's something that can erase it from 1,000 miles away." Subtle? Not even a little. Effective? Absolutely. The Ohio's stopover also highlights just how central the Philippines has become in this US-China naval standoff. With the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement back in action, American forces now have rotational access to bases across the archipelago. In other words, Subic Bay isn't just a throwback to Cold War nostalgia, it's a frontline chess square in the Indo-Pacific. For Washington, the message to Manila is, "We've got your back." For Beijing, it's, "Checkmate is a lot closer than you think." Of course, China knows these submarines are nightmare fuel. They're nearly impossible to track. They carry enough Tomahawks to level an airbase before breakfast, and they can launch special ops teams undetected. That's why Beijing has poured so much into anti-submarine warfare. But here's the problem. Catching an Ohio-class sub is like trying to catch a ghost with a butterfly net. Sure, you can brag about drones and sonar grids, but if the Ohio doesn't want to be found, good luck. Still, that hasn't stopped Beijing from trying. They've deployed long-range maritime patrol aircraft, installed deep-sea hydrophone sensors, and tested massive uncrewed underwater vehicles near Hainan, home of their submarine fleet. These moves aren't just about defense, they're about projecting confidence. China wants the world to believe that if an American sub slips into its waters, it'll know. But whether that's reality or just propaganda is another story. And speaking of propaganda, let's not forget the information war. Chinese state media went into overdrive the moment Ohio appeared at Subic. Outlets like the Global Times dismissed it as our intimidation theater, calling US subs paper tigers the narrative. America's moves look scary, but don't actually change the balance. That's classic messaging. Downplay the threat, puff up your own strength, and reassure your domestic audience that everything's under control. But here's the catch. Numbers don't lie. The US Navy might not have as many ships as China. The PLAN now boasts over 350 vessels. But what America does have is experience, technology, and alliances. Throw in submarines like the Ohio, and suddenly the naval math looks a lot less one-sided. And Beijing knows it. Meanwhile, for the Philippines and other regional allies, the Ohio's visit is reassurance in steel and nuclear propulsion. It's proof that Washington isn't just talking about freedom of navigation. It's willing to back those words with the kind of hardware that makes adversaries sweat. For countries constantly harassed by Chinese Coast Guard vessels and maritime militias, that matters more than any speech at a summit. So here we are. China flaunting carriers, the US flexing submarines, and the Philippines caught in the middle, but also holding one of the most valuable cards on the table: geography. The first island chain isn't just a map feature, it's a natural barrier that defines the Indo-Pacific chessboard, and Subic Bay just became one of its most important squares. History proves these kinds of submarine deployments aren't just risky for rivals, they're risky for the US too. Back in 2021, the USS Connecticut, a Seawolf-class attack sub, slammed into an uncharted seamount in the very same waters. 11 sailors were injured, the bow was wrecked, and Washington had to scramble to contain the PR fallout, while Beijing pointed and yelled, "See? Reckless Americans!" If a simple navigation error can turn into an international incident, imagine what happens if a US sub bumps into a Chinese destroyer or drone. One wrong move, and suddenly you've got CNN running a countdown clock to World War III. That's why every time the Ohio surfaces, it's both a message and a gamble. It says, we're here, we're ready, and we're watching. But it also risks fueling the very tension it's supposed to deter. The South China Sea isn't just crowded, it's chaotic. Coast guards, fishing fleets, surveillance planes, submarines. It's like rush hour traffic, but with missiles. And this isn't happening in a vacuum. China's naval buildup has been relentless. Artificial islands turned into unsinkable aircraft carriers, runways carved out of reefs, missile batteries stationed where fishermen used to dock. From Scarborough Shoal to Second Thomas Shoal, every skirmish with Filipino vessels tells the same story. Beijing wants control, permanently. And every freedom of the navigation patrol, every US deployment, tells the opposite story. Not so fast. Which brings us back to the Ohio. Because this submarine isn't just about the here and now, it's a reminder of the future. A future where every shipping lane, every trade route, and every security alliance in Asia hangs on who owns the shadows beneath the waves. If China masters anti-submarine warfare, America's stealth advantage narrows. If the US keeps perfecting its undersea fleet, Beijing faces a wall it can't climb. Either way, the stakes are ocean-sized. So what's the takeaway? The Ohio's stop in Subic Bay wasn't a pit stop. It was a deliberate move in a long, dangerous game of naval chess, one where the board stretches across the entire Indo-Pacific, and every piece carries nuclear weight. For the US, it's reassurance to allies. For China, it's a taunt. For the rest of us, it's a reminder that one submarine can shift the balance of global trade and security overnight. And the real question, how long before a single accident, a misread sonar ping, or a hot-headed commander sparks something no one can reel back in? Because history doesn't repeat. It collides. If you found this breakdown sharp, bold, and maybe a little terrifying, you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe for more unapologetic takes on the world's biggest power plays, and drop a comment. Do you think the USS Ohio's deployment is a brilliant deterrent or a disaster waiting to happen? Let's get that debate rolling.